Cruisers are now basically the best ship in Stellaris. In this video, we're going to look at a few optimum builds, what they are good at defeating, but also what they can be countered by. Amongst these cruiser designs, you will find a ship type that can defeat any other ship in the game, be they battleship, corvette, destroyer, or even cruiser. So let's not beat about the bush and let's dive straight into this shipbuilding guide. And if you leave auto-generate designs turned on, please know that you are the devil and you make me sad. The first cruiser build we're going to look at is a very, very effective build that you probably expected to see. This is a Disruptor Cruiser absolutely filled with disruptors. Currently in Stellaris, disruptors are one of the most powerful weapons you have at your disposal. They are able to completely bypass any shields and armor and strike directly at hulls. Usually ships have far fewer hull points than they do armor and shields combined, meaning that even though disruptors deal a lower average damage than other weapons, they are very, very good at knocking out other ships. Disruptors have a 100% accuracy and relatively high tracking, so they are going to deal with corvettes and destroyers with ease. These ships will also be fantastic at dealing with any other cruisers that might have lasers, plasma weaponry, Gauss cannons, auto cannons, anything like that equipped. You'll want to make sure you have a picket combat computer on there. That will mean the behavior on these cruisers is one that brings them into the closest range possible, so all of their disruptors will fire. They will chase down enemy ships and zap them. Disruptors also have the advantage that because they deal direct damage to hull, they reduce the effectiveness of enemy ships as the combat goes on, because any ship which has its hull points damaged will deal lower damage outputs. But you may be surprised to learn this is actually not the best cruiser design. In fact, far from it. Here we have the Torpedo Cruiser. The Torpedo Cruiser has, as you might expect, torpedoes. Torpedoes have an interesting special ability as of patch 3.6 with the combat rebalance. They deal additional damage based on the size of the enemy ship. So against a corvette, they will deal 200% damage, meaning our damage output for one of these torpedoes is 250 to 500 damage, which is basically enough to kill a corvette in pretty much one shot unless you're unlucky. And that will scale as the ship size increases. 3 times damage against destroyers, 5 times against cruisers, and a whopping 9 times versus battleships. So a torpedo cruiser will absolutely shred any battleships or generally any other cruisers you come up against. By pairing this ship with missiles that have a longer range, this helps you mitigate any enemy point defense that you may be facing, because point defense will try to shoot down missiles and torpedoes alike, and you want to make sure your torpedoes actually get through. We're going to put lots of afterburners on this ship to increase its speed because it does have to get into close range. The torpedoes only have a very short range, 0 to 30, so you do need to get up close and personal to deal damage. But these torpedo cruisers will destroy disruptor cruisers that we just looked at. They will. If your enemy brings disruptor cruisers to face your torpedoes, it's kind of like bringing a knife to a tank fight. I just want to briefly draw attention to the configuration of defensive modules as well before we go any further. You'll want to have some shields on your ships, but mainly you do need to go with armor. Armor is much more cost effective and generally more effective in Stellaris at the moment. It's going to give us a massive amount of armor points, and whilst it will suffer against disruptors that can bypass it, most other weapons, even missiles, will have to chew through armor before they can start hurting your ship's hull points and destroying it. Of course, definitely go for a torpedo combat computer on these torpedo class cruisers. That gives you more explosive weapons damage, which helps all of your weapons here across the board and brings you into the closest possible range. And if you're enjoying this video, please book a relaxing cruise for that like button. Whilst those torpedo cruisers were good, we can actually do one better. Here we have the all-rounder class. You see, the previous torpedo cruisers we looked at do suffer somewhat against corvettes. Corvette spams will have so many ships with high evasion that torpedoes definitely suffer. This all-rounder class is better against corvettes, and it's also better against torpedo cruisers. What we have here is a single torpedo, all missiles on our small slot, so basically the same, and then we've swapped out our torpedo core for a hangar core. We're going to put some point defense on to deal with enemy missiles and throw in some advanced strike craft. Pairing this with an artillery combat computer will yield some absolutely fantastic results. What will happen in an engagement with these all-rounders? Let's start with the torpedoes. Well, you will fly into combat against the previous Torpedo class cruisers, and you'll find that they do a massive first strike against you. You have 1 torpedo against their 3, so your numbers will be depleted. But torpedoes have a very long cooldown. So as these torpedoes are cooling down, your missiles, and more importantly your strike craft, will be harassing the enemy ships basically anywhere else in the fight. The fighters also have one additional job that massively increases the lethality of this ship design. You see, with the combat rebalance, we now have disengagement opportunities. When a ship is at low hull points, it will attempt to disengage, but it only gets a set number of chances, and after it has used up all of its disengagement opportunities, it then can no longer disengage. Disengaging would keep the ship alive. The chance a ship has to disengage is directly proportional to the damage it has just taken. So if a strike craft hits your ship, it has a very low damage and thus a very low chance of disengaging. Strike craft can then use up all of the disengagement opportunities a ship has, meaning the torpedo can come in and finish it off. The artillery combat computer is great because it means your cruiser will continue to fall back and try to stay out of range of the enemy torpedoes. Whenever a ship gets in range, it will fire off a torpedo against that ship and deal crippling damage. In an engagement against Torpedo class cruisers, these all-rounders will win the day. So they are better against corvettes, destroyers, and cruisers. When they come up against a Disruptor class cruiser, they will lose, but we have a simple solution for that will absolutely stop any Disruptor-equipped navy in their tracks. Simply change out 1 or 2 of your advanced afterburners and replace it with some armor hardening. 25 to 30% usually will be enough to carry the day, but if you want to be really sure, you could add in an extra module. It's even better if you can get the armor hardening effects from a counselor trait Genius Armorer, then you can stick with the advanced afterburners, which are really good. Sublight speed is crucial now in Stellaris to winning engagements. Now this all-rounder class with armor hardening will be able to deal with all corvettes, destroyers, and most cruisers. It does have one slight weakness, and that weakness is artillery ships. Here we have an artillery class cruiser. This has 1 kinetic artillery on the front. Kinetic artillery are the best form of artillery you can find in the game. They have the longest range possible and deal high damage with a low cooldown. We're pairing that up with 2 neutron launchers that also have massive range, 120 range, and while it looks like they don't deal much damage, only 3.5 damage on average, they also have the torpedo effect. So they will deal 5 times damage against cruisers and a whopping 9 times damage against battleships. These artillery class cruisers can defeat all-rounder cruisers that we just looked at, and that is mainly because the all-rounder cruisers have artillery combat computers. If you were to change these over to explosive combat computers, you could then deal with artillery class ships, but you would struggle when coming up against close-range torpedo ships, as you would no longer see the behavior which we need, that is the artillery behavior of backing off from the enemy. So these artillery class cruisers are the only way to defeat all-rounder class cruisers, but they suffer against any weapon that comes into close range. They will lose against corvettes, destroyers, and Disruptor or Torpedo Cruisers. Now, you might be confused here as well, because I have all of my small slots empty. There are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that these ships are quite expensive. They're about 50 to 70 alloys more expensive than the previous cruisers we looked at. So adding in more missiles would make these cruisers more expensive and therefore less cost effective. But the main reason we're not adding them is that the neutron launchers and kinetic artillery have a range of 120. Regular missiles only have a range of 100. So by having no regular missiles and the artillery combat computer, our ships will attempt to sit at a range of 120, which is out of range of basically every other weapon in the game. And that's part of why they are so devastating against the other cruiser classes we've looked at. These ships will also do very well against artillery battleships, but they will suffer in the initial parts of the engagement as artillery battleships have X-slot weapons and cruisers simply don't have access to that. I would generally recommend the mainstay of your navy against PvP or PvE be these all-rounder class cruisers with a little bit of armor hardening. That should basically be the best ship in the game that can deal with almost anything. When you're coming up against the AI will generally run a mix of ship classes, so if you find yourself fighting a few artillery class ships in an overall mixed fleet, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. The issue here really is only in a PvP situation where the enemy knows what you have and brings only artillery to the fight. They do also suffer against high-level endgame crisis ships. If you'd like me to do a video on how to deal with endgame crisis ships at the moment in Stellaris, let me know down in the comments below. We can definitely have a look at that. So let's do a quick recap. Disruptor Cruisers are great, but suffer against armor hardening. Disruptor Cruisers are great, they can beat artillery ships and corvettes and destroyers, but suffer against armor hardening. Torpedo ships are great, they can deal with corvettes and destroyers alright, and absolutely eviscerate most cruisers and any battleships they will come up against, especially artillery ships. The all-rounder will deal fantastically with corvettes, destroyers, and any other type of ship as long as it's not artillery based. And the artillery ships are what you bring to the fight if anyone runs an all-rounder. Yes, Stellaris ship combat is more complicated than it's ever been, but I hope this video, based on extensive testing that I've done, will help you understand the kind of ships you can make, what they are good at fighting against, but also what they can be countered by. If you've enjoyed this video on how to build cruisers, basically the best class in Stellaris now, but you're wondering, how should I build my destroyers to maximize their effectiveness, especially in the early to mid game, click the video on screen now.